Welcome to the panel on interesting magic systems. Sorry, we're a little undermanned right now. Just to get started, I'd like to do something a little unusual. I know that there is a chat open right now, and I think that the three of us have very different backgrounds. Myself, yeah, let's just start with that. Let's start with introductions. Quiana, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your work relates to the design of interesting magic systems?
Awesome. So, yeah, like you said before, my name is Quiana Chase, and I am a writer, even though my full-time job is basically glorified DM in space. And even though, like, a lot of what I deal with in my job is like with sci-fi, it's magic. It's magic. Like warp travel is like it's magic. And I also am just super fascinated with the idea of magic systems, and I've done a lot of like my own research trying to craft really like the kind of magic systems that I want to read about. And yeah, I just think they're neat, basically, and I write a lot about them.
Thank you. And MK Hutchins.
Hi. So I'm a writer. I've written novels and a slew of short stories that have been out in places like Analog and Strange Horizons and Podcastle. So I've designed lots of different magic systems. I've also done tie-in work for Fantasy Flight Games' Keyforge line. So I've done stories within the confines of someone else's magic system, which was also really fun.
That's cool.
That is really cool.
I myself am not really a writer. I have written one paranormal romance novel and released it on Amazon. It's been so successful, it sold literally dozens of copies. You have no idea. But what I do is that I am a video game designer. I'm the game design lead for a small studio called Space Heater Games. And so when I think of magic system design, I have a lot of other considerations. So we've got two writers, one tabletop gamer and one video gamer. So we have a lot of different aspects and ways in which a magic system can be used. And what I would like to ask the audience to type into chat right now is, when you came to this panel, what kind of magic system were you eager to learn about? Like, were you eager to learn about how to make magic systems fun for players, how to integrate magic systems into a game, how to write magic systems for fantasy novels or science fiction novels? Because I totally agree that most science fiction, the super science that you use is just another form of a magic system with a different skin on top. And I think that we'll try to guide our discussion, and I'll figure out how much I should say and I should shut up based on what the audience expectations are. So right now I'm going to go over to the chat for the LeGuin room and look around all of them. Fantasy novels, writing first. Okay, looks like we're mostly going to be focusing on writing. So let's start by talking about what pieces are necessary in order to define a magic system over the course of a novel. I know that most of the people who come already know about what it means to have a soft magic system and a hard magic system. In order to make a magic system hard, what components or pieces must exist?
Ooh, that's a really good question. For me, the definition of a hard magic system is its programming. So when you have like X action, Y action will always be the result of it. So I'm pretty sure you're like the people in this chat are familiar with Brennan Sanderson's magic systems, which are examples of like super hard magic systems where it's like, if you do this, if you swallow this metal, then you will get this much amount of power. It's very like concrete. It's very linear. It works very in like a scientific way, similar to how the rules of our own world work. And it's very easy for the audience to understand. the different options that the characters have. Whereas a soft magic system is more like Lord of the Rings, where it's more of an atmospheric thing. And that's the type of magic system that you usually find in allegories. And so, and less in like a faux Earth world.
Mhm.
So.
Thank you. MK Hutchins, do you have any thoughts?
Maybe too many thoughts. Yeah, hard magic systems are these really, really rule-based things, and soft magic systems are less so. They need more like emotional resonance. They need to make sense to you as the reader. Though I think these also cross over, and you can pull from like both sides of like rules logic and emotional logic. I just finished reading Rhythm of War. So Brandon Sanderson novel, which there's so much that's like super rules based, but the characters, if you're not familiar, get like cool power-ups when they say these oaths. And that's not like a rule-based thing. It's like when you have made the sufficient emotional journey, you may say these cool words and have a cool power-up at perhaps a dramatic moment. And that's actually a very soft magic system thing in the middle of this hard magic system. So I think looking at the way magic is used, in Sanderson is really satisfying. In Lord of the Rings is satisfying. In Terry Pratchett, which is also fairly soft, is satisfying. Magic realism is all very like, but you can look at like, oh, how do all of these different people use magic systems? How is that satisfying? The rules is satisfying. The emotional payoff is satisfying. And you can use all of those things in a story to end.
Yeah.
And I think that in modern days, we've sort of fallen in love with the idea of the hard magic systems, but I think that there's sort of a sliding scale between soft and hard. And even Brandon Sanderson, who I think we could consider the king of the hard magic systems, if you look at the way that the Night Mother works, that's kind of a very soft magic system if you think about it. It's because it is adjudicated by an entity that has her own thoughts and motivations. You don't necessarily get that input and output. There's just some very simple and very flexible rules that go along with that. And it gives that element of mystery that you're looking for in a soft magic system into the middle of the hard magic system setting, which I think is interesting. Are there any other components? So we've spoken about rules. Is there anything else that you need in order to define a magic system in a satisfactory way for the readers? Or is it just the rules? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Just, I think that the most important thing for your magic system is that it's one that you enjoy reading about, and it's something that you like writing about. Because sometimes I knew especially like that as a new author who had just discovered like all of these hard magic systems, that was really new for me. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is the right way to do magic. This is the right way to do fantasy. And I need to do something like this. And I got so caught up on that there were some times where I wouldn't write things that were as fun for me. So yeah, like the right way is to do something that's fun. If soft magic is something that you really like, something that you really enjoy, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having that soft magic. But just do what you like, basically.
Is there anything else?
I think with magic, like part of the reason we read it is for that like newness and wonder kind of factor. So if your magic system is the same as the rules for, I want to say baking bread, but like that is magical and alchemical. But like if it's just you want to have something feel wondrous and exciting to the readers.
And in some ways, I feel as though that's what you lose in a hard magic system if you overdefine the rules. I feel like there's some authors that can get away with this by slowly revealing the rules over time. So that which looks magical and mysterious becomes concrete and usable and exploitable just in time to introduce the next content, which appears mysterious. So, like, it's not until near the very end that you understand how hemorrhagy works in Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn series, and until then, it is a very soft magic that it's like, I don't understand what's going on here, and therefore it is wondrous and scary because the opponents have access to it and the heroes don't. Go ahead.
I think sometimes the wonder is also just in how creative the author is with using it, where you're like, oh, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. There's a great audiobook called How to Defeat the Demon King in 10 Easy Steps. And it's a lit RPG book that's super riffing off of Zelda and Link. And the main character is a bag mage. Like, I can store things in my bags and like, okay, which sounds like, okay, maybe that's not really interesting. You're an inventory magician, but oh my gosh, does the author do amazingly fun things with that? Like, my children who listened with us spent months talking about the munchkiny things they would do with bag magic after listening to this, because the author took this really simple thing and then like went with it and thought about it and expanded. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my brain, like, this is, yes, feed me more of your cotton candy bag magic. My brain is exploding. This is so much fun. You took the time to really take this mundane, not so interesting, I can store things in my inventory and make it the thing that like saves the world. And it was amazing. So I love that too, when people take really simple things and think really way too hard about them.
Can I just say, I really appreciate how a lit RPG book is being complemented by a professional in a professional setting. The genre's come a really long way. So.
Oh yeah.
So what makes a magic system interesting? The title is an interesting magic systems. Is there something that differentiates magic systems that are interesting from ones that just exist in a book and are not interesting?
To me, the difference between an interesting magic system and a not interesting magic system is a magic system that I can fantasize about, and also something that I can't get from any other author or any other stories anywhere else. So, and the way I've been looking at the chat and I'm seeing a lot of things like, how do I create unique magic systems? How do I do things that aren't just like what everyone else is doing? And I've discovered for me, one of the best ways to shake it up is to put my magic in, or put my setting in a time period or an era that's completely different from the traditional like faux European,
generic European,
yeah. Like one of my favorite magic systems is in a book called The Paper Mage by Leah Cutter, and I talked about this on another panel that I was in, like Wizard for Hire, I think. But it's all about origami, and it takes place in ancient China, and just implementing all the different like parts of her culture, and what if origami was magic, and how would people in ancient China use it, and what would the social dynamics be like, and all of that sort of stuff surrounding it made it so fascinating to me and super interesting. One of my favorite magic systems that I've ever invented came after like I watched Treasure Planet, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. They took like a revolutionary time period with like sailing ships and pirates and then space and then smushed them together. I wonder if I could do something like that with fantasy and pirates and like that colonial era. And the magic system I have for that is the favorite one I've ever invented, and it has to do with like magic guns and how people are, and it has to do with like the seasons of the year and how people use their magic and like shoot cool things out of their guns. So yeah, like switch up the setting. That's one of there's no wrong way to like come up with a unique magic system, but that's one technique you can use, is like switching up the settings. And I know that Megan has a lot more experience with this, so what, like,
go for it.
I don't know if I have experience. I liked sorry, I don't know why it's slower thinking in front of a camera when I can see my own face than when I'm in front of people. You talked about like magic systems being like integrated and part of like the character and the world, and I think that gives you so much more room to explore them rather than it being pasted on. One of my favorite books is Diana Wynne Jones' The Dark Lord of Darecombe. And she takes this kind of Western fantasy magic setting with, your like spells and people do things, and it's relatively soft, but she makes it so interesting and so compelling. There's a portal from our world into that magic world, and the magic world is now under contract by an evil CEO who's using it for tourism. And so, smiles, like, ooh, yeah, like, so everyone in this magic world with their cool magic life has to put on like tours for dumb mortal earthlings who want to come hang out in Fantasyland, and it's horrible, and they're like dealing with these economic things, and all of a sudden that old magic kind of system, which on its own would not be especially remarkable, is new and fresh again because she's twisted it, and now you have to deal with, I mean, the world building that's catchy there is the Pilgrim Party tours and how they deal with it, and the evil Mr. Chesney CEO, which but she does this interesting thing, and then it's integrated everywhere, and she explores it from all sorts of angles and makes you think really hard about how this world works. And that's really, really fun.
That's really interesting. So one of the ways that you can make a magic system interesting is by taking a magic system designed for one purpose and explore how it can be used to accomplish a different purpose. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Yeah, sure. That sounds wise.
Okay. What about uninteresting magic systems? Are there any magic systems that you have seen in a book, and maybe you don't want to name the author's name just out of politeness, but any magic systems that have really fallen flat for you? Something that you would have expected to be interesting on the offset, but just didn't work?
Oh, I actually have an answer to this.
Oh, go ahead. Go first. No, you go first. I
will call on Quiana.
Okay.
If you're gonna have a politeness, I'm gonna solve it.
Okay. I am going to out this particular author for having a magic system that did not quite work, and I will use their name because it is me. I was going through like this draft that I was writing, and I was just like, why is the magic, like, it was a really cool idea. It was like war paint, and so you apply different colors of war paint that give you different types of powers, and it was, really like a really intriguing idea. But as I was reading through the story, I was like, I don't like it. Like, this is boring. It's uninteresting. And there were other interesting parts of the story, but it wasn't the magic. And I realized that it was because it was not utilized as often as it could have been. And also, 2 out of the 3 main characters that I followed around did not have access to that magic. So I had this cool magic system, but 2 of the characters couldn't/wouldn't use it really. And it also, like, I feel like that sort of the kind of powers that this paint would have given people is something they'd be using for all sorts of things. Like there are so many agricultural applications, and like there was one paint that gives you super strong instincts and like knowledge and wisdom, so it's easier for you to make the right choices. Like, you're going to use that in more than just battle, and it was just so underused. And I feel like in your story, if you want to make your magic system interesting, you have to make sure the characters utilize it. And that's also kind of something people pointed out about the book that I have released right now. And there are a lot of good things about it. There's a lot of not as great things about it. But one of the things where it kind of falls short is it's a story about people with superpowers who rarely use their superpowers. And even though they have good reasons in the narrative for that, like, it's still, you have readers who are coming to read about the powers, who are coming to read about the cool things. And if they're not using them, and if it's not being implemented into the setting or into their choices in interesting ways, then it's going to be boring to readers. So.
Thank you. I agree that whenever you have a magic system, you need to also consider the trickle-down effects of what that will do to the setting and to the world. And that's one of the issues that I have with D&D, quite frankly, is that you have a very complex magic system in D&D, And but very rarely is the ramifications of that magic system on the world fully explored. I think that Eberron was one of the first ones to like really go gung-ho into what happens if magic is as ubiquitous as the rules try to describe it as being. How about yourself, MK Hutchins?
Yeah, I was also going to talk about underutilization in a book that I actually really like, but my brother always complains about it because if someone has the power to fly, they should do it more than twice in the book. And I kind of have to cede him that point. I still enjoyed it. I'm like, oh yeah, the focus of this book didn't do like all the things it could with the magic system. And as you were talking, Quiana, about characters who don't have magic, I think that can also be an interesting thing to explore if you're actually exploring it fully. Like in Avatar: The Last Airbender, you have Sokka, who's like,
he's the best character, and I love his. Anyway, yeah.
And then you have May and Ty Lee, and you have these like non-bender people, but instead of just I don't have magic, we carry on, it really delves into like this is what it's like to be a non-magic user in this magic world. And okay, I guess we'll just talk about Brandon Sanderson all the time. The Rhythmatist is actually one of my favorite books, and it's about someone who can't do like the magic. And so I think that also leaves you opportunities for really interesting places to explore. But if you haven't explored, if you're not looking, if you're not digging into those things, then it's just kind of on the surface.
Mm-hmm. So how can a interesting magic system be used to support the story? Because I feel as though there are some stories in which you've got a plot and then you've got a magic system that's kind of like unrelated, that it's like, well, I'm fantasy, I need to have a story, but my character arcs don't necessarily have anything to do with the magic system. The plot doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the magic system. The magic system is just something that's like set dressing for other stuff that doesn't have to do with it. What are some ways that you can have the magic system and the plot and character arcs integrated into something that feels like they belong together? How can you support your story with your magic system?
I think there are two easy ways to do this, and it's what I'm doing, like in that book that I was talking about that was boring, and I'm like cleaning it up and have the magic either be the reason for all of the problems, or like a cause for a lot of the problems that the characters are dealing with, or a tool that the characters are using in an attempt to solve their problems. So, and obviously, like that's like super basic. But so one of the commenters said, like they pointed out that like can something be commercialized or something? Where was it? I can't find it anymore because you guys are so active. But basically, like if something can be sold, it will. And so with magic, I look at like it's another form of power, and people like having power, and they'll use it to try to get an edge over other people, and they want to be the sole controllers of it. So, and that's something you see a lot in a lot of excellent hard magic stories as well, like Sanderson's works, as you have a very specific way like that the upper class guys tries to control that magic, and you can and you can tie in your other threads and struggles that your characters have by just including that magic with the other natural power struggles that are going to happen in your story.
It's interesting. Thank you.
So I usually start with a magic system. So this won't be everybody's writing process, but I'll be like, oh, I have this really cool, I want to write a magic system about post holes. My background's in archaeology. I really love post holes, and maybe if I make a cool magic system about it, someone else will read about post holes. That'll be fun. And then I'll like plan out this magic system, and then I'll think like, who does this affect? Who controls it? Who uses this? How would this be? Like, what's the most interesting and messed up thing I could do with this magic system system. And from there, I start building, the larger society. And then I need to find some characters to wrap a story around so I can tell a story about magical post holes and have that be a thing because I wanted it to be a thing. So I don't know. I know other people like do characters first and then add other things, but I usually start with the fantastical elements and then it's all baked in.
Yeah.
That's cool. Thank you. And then you just sort of extrapolate from there. How do you determine the effects that a magic system would have on a society? We've spoken about this a couple of times, but I have tried, and I've also have had friends who have tried to say, okay, if this magic exists, how would things change? And very often they fall into either two traps. They either say, well, we'll take our modern day or whatever time period we're writing in, assume that these magical elements have been added to it, and then see what changes. Or they'll just replace what we have in our modern day with magical equivalents, like magical telephones and magical computers and magical, and like those are the two sort of, but I have thought, if you were to have this magic like from the ground up, like you start discovering the magic system the same time that you start discovering the wheel or writing or something like that, it would have caused technology to evolve in a very different way, even if you're only going up to the medieval setting, like things would be different. You might not have the same sort of feudalism. You might not thresh your grain in the same way. You might not cook bread in the same way. How do you take a magic system and determine how society would have evolved given that magic system? Or do you? Is that needless complexity and needless world building and the audience doesn't need it?
I think that's the really fun part of exploring magic systems. Like, how is this different? How would things change? What kind of trade or currency or medicine do we have? I don't think there's an easy answer to that. I think that's a big bulk of your world building, coming up with an idea of, it would be fun to have a magic system with post holes. Like, that's not the hard part, sitting down and then being like, okay, what do these do? How does this affect things? How does this get used? How does this, sorry, that's like my writing, but it's what I have in my head.
That's fine.
In the magic system, when you burn down a building, you can use the magic left in the post holes from whatever the building was. So if you burn down a hospital, you can use healing magic from the post holes, which means there's a society that builds really shoddy buildings because they're planning on burning them down in a decade once the magic has accumulated. So like, ooh, this is fun. What are these? So like, I don't know. I feel like that's just a big process where you have to ask yourself questions or, find someone to talk out loud to, or a pet or a small baby who doesn't care that you're just going to ramble at them for an hour and just like out what's going on with this, or talk to someone who's savvy in history or learn about history and just fill your brain with things and brainstorm. I think it's a process and bulk of the world building work.
Yeah. I agree with that like 100%. And I really like that you shared your personal process, especially since I know there are a lot of people who are attending this panel just because they want to know how you come up with things. So I think that the way that you get to the point where you can make those extrapolations, where you can sit down and figure out how certain things would affect society in a certain way, is to study technology and inventions that have been made and look at how they have affected our society today. Because even though you probably won't have the magical equivalent of cell phones or whatever, just seeing what kind of effects and chain reactions happen when new technology is introduced will help get those gears turning and get you thinking in the right space where you can be like, okay, so if I live in a world where people are human batteries of magic and that magic charges during whatever season they were born in, like, how would that be exploited? And it's yeah, and you got to get those gears turning by looking at history and different aspects of technology.
That's interesting. I'd like to talk about, because you mentioned that you did stuff for Keyforge. What happens if you inherit a magic system from either a setting or another author or a game that you're developing tie-ins for or things like that? Because I know that a lot of games are guilty of like, here's a magic system and that's the way that it works. We've designed it for players, not to build a cohesive world out of it. Now we're tossing it to you. You're an author. You need to figure out how the world works, given that we created a magic system without thinking about the world. When you inherit a magic system from somebody else, what do you do in order to ensure that it does not come off as fake or gamey?
So for Keyforge, it was really fun. The Keyforge world is like this big mashup world planet. And so I read the available stuff, and there's both a card game and a tabletop RPG book. So I read both of those, and I just made notes about places and corners that I thought were really interesting, where I could tell an interesting story and do something that excited me. The kind of thing that if I were a player, I would annoy my GM doing. Like that thing. Oh, that's the thing I want to dig into. And for writing tie-in in particular, I wrote a bunch of pitches. These are things that interest me. And then they came back and said, these ones, please. So that kind of narrowed it down to these are things that like the Keyforge people thought would fit well into the world. But they specifically talked like, we don't want this to sound like people are making dice rolls, just make it a story. And that was actually really fun to look at. Okay, here are the rules. What would that... I mean, tabletop RPGs are a simulation of life anyway, and you're just kind of schlumping it back into fiction again without the numbers. And so I don't know, that was kind of organic for me, but maybe that's because I've read a lot and played tabletop RPGs.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts? I know you've written tie-ins for Fantasy Flight, right, Quiana?
Fantasy Flight?
I must have been thinking of a different panelist that you were on the same panel with. For some reason, I thought that you had done some writing for Fantasy Flight. Never mind.
Yeah, you're good. Like that sounds cool. I wish I could say I have not.
For me, when I am designing games and writing about them, one of the important things is to lower the amount of what's called ludonarrative dissonance. And ludonarrative dissonance is when you have the mechanics of a game that do not match the narrative of the game. For instance, in Final Fantasy VII, the original, not the remake, there is a very important character who dies, and there's another character, kind of a side character, who turns to stone. And we have already introduced in the mechanics of this game that you have an item called a Phoenix Down that can bring people back to life, and you have a item called a Soft that can change people back from being turned to stone. And yet, when someone dies in a cutscene, they're like dead for some reason. And when someone turns to stone in a cutscene, they're gone. And the reason for that isn't explained, and that creates that damages the suspension of disbelief, because if you've got mechanics that work in one way and you have the narrative that's working under a different rule set, it doesn't make sense. Another example is in GoldenEye. You're running around with all of these guns and whatever, and you're able to just like one-man army this base. And then in a cutscene, somebody walks in with a pistol and points it at your head and says, "Aha, I've got you." And it's like, okay, that's going to deal like 1 to 10 damage to me, and I've got like X amount of health. Why do I care that this guy with the pistol is pointing it at my head? But because you're in a cutscene, suddenly different rules apply. When you're writing in video games, you often need to work really closely with the designers in order to figure out what rules they have invented and try to make sure that the world that you are writing for the video game follows the same rules, because otherwise, every time you flip into cutscene mode, you damage your player's suspension of disbelief. And that's my horse.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I think that
a comment.
I was just going to like tie into that and just be like 100%. And I think this also applies to tabletop role-playing games as well. I think that in that example of Final Fantasy VII that you put forth, I think that if they had had another cutscene or something that happened right before where a character got super injured and if you had any like magical healing items, those got wiped from your inventory or lost in like an attempt to like erase from your physical inventory in some sort of cutscene when you try to revive or heal someone, then that cutscene wouldn't have been an option. So you can still like have those permadeaths and manipulate with like the rules of.
You just need to follow your own settings rules when doing so.
Yeah, you just need to follow your own settings rules and figure it out. So yeah, I thought that was a really excellent example.
Thank you. Okay, let's take questions.
All right, we have quite a few. So just a second here while I scroll up, because we have a number. All right. So first, we're going to go ahead with the Lemon Wizard of Zibility. Okay, yeah. Asks, how to make magic systems interesting for readers and players that will make them want to research and live the magic system experience.
That was a sentence fragment. I think that may not have been a question. I think that when I said, hey, what are you guys coming for? They said, we're coming for how to make magic systems that such and such. Mm-hmm. Did anybody catch? Does that cause anybody to want to respond, or?
I'll just rephrase. Sorry, I might have just read it wrong.
Okay.
More specifically, they are looking to see more or less how to make the systems really involved and make the players want to enjoy that system and spend time in it.
Okay. How to make players or readers want to spend time with a given magic system and enjoy or live through it. How do you do that?
I think it comes down to what we were talking about earlier, and having that magic system impacts the society in a unique way. And also, because it sounds like the kind of magic system you're looking for is a hard magic system, and having a bunch of rules that are like, maybe the characters or players only interact with a couple here and there, but there are hints to that super detailed other textbook of how your magic works sprinkled throughout the narrative so it doesn't bog it down.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, MK.
No, I was just thinking of in tabletop role-playing games I've played, always the funnest thing is to be one kind of magic and someone be another kind of magic, and totally mess with the DM combining those in interesting ways, because there are things to like hook our little brains on and play with and think about. And I think you can do that in prose too, where you have a magic system laid out and you're doing things and you leave places for your reader to wonder and think, and I would use bag magic this way, I would do this, because you've opened up their brain to possibilities of creative things to do.
Okay. Thank you. Next question.
All right, so Chesh asks, how to make element-based magic systems interesting?
Yeah, this is definitely in the what did you come for section. But how do you make element-based magic systems interesting?
You do it. Sorry, that's all I've got. You just make
I think that all of the same rules apply. I think that you just need to have it strongly tied to the world. I think that you need to catch the right balance between mystery and usability. Just all the stuff we've spoken about. Next question.
All right. So next we'll go to Laura Hawley, who asks, how do you get ideas, like the burning a building to get its power or using origami to get power? These are very creative. How did you come up with those ideas?
Excellent question. Go ahead. Those are your magic systems, so...
Okay, I guess I'll go first. I just always think about things and then I write them down when they strike me.
Mhm.
Like COVID has been bad for this, but I get lots of ideas being really bored in church, because that's when my mind wanders. So like, okay, actually, the book I'm working on right now, like there's a scripture verse somewhere where a prophet is complaining, like, would that all people were prophets, and I'm like, ooh, I can spin that into a magic system, and then I'm not paying attention anymore. But it's making a good book. So I don't know, like, give your space, give yourself time to read, to explore, to be curious, give yourself time to be bored so that your brain has to entertain yourself. um,
Mhm.
don't know that I have a really good answer beyond that. This is it's like what my brain does.
Yeah. I know that for me, oftentimes, like, I'll look at things in real world that I think are really cool. And I didn't invent the origami system. That was Leah Cutter for her book Paper Mage. Um, but yeah, I'll just look at things that I think are really cool, like guns or ships, or I'll see like a really cool picture of someone with war paint, and I'll be like, wow, what if that was magical? What if I got powers from that? And what kind of powers would come from that? And I remember like I went, and then I'll just go on these super deep research holes where I'll go and find out all these cool things about how societies have used this aspect in the past. And I'll just pick out ideas and turn it into something um, that's literally magical. But there's no like right way to get ideas. And oftentimes they just happen. And I really liked what Megan said about just like being bored and always being open to different ideas and things that will happen.
Cool. Thank you. Let's do 2 more questions.
All right, so Crow Darkness asks, what are some cliche limitations or magic systems in general to avoid in writing?
Does anyone have thoughts on that?
I'll have a thought on that. Okay, so like I talked about Diana Wynne Jones, the Dark Lord of Darkholme, and she all the cliches and made it wonderful. I think often there's a My Little Pony episode where they had a suicide prevention episode that was appropriate for 4-year-olds, and it like, yeah, I'm like, it blows my mind. So you say like, what should I avoid? I'm like, anything can be well done. Can you do it well? That's really the question. Like, if the people at My Little Ponies can make this episode, and then my children ask me why I'm crying, and I tell them to go away. Like anything can be done in fiction. You can write an awesome new. I thought like, oh, elemental magic systems. I'm so over that. And then there's Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I'm still obsessed. So anything can be done well. It's, can you do this well? Can you make it interesting? So I don't know that there's any like specific cliche to avoid with magic systems. I've seen things I thought I was over that I love.
Yeah.
I look at my YouTube recommendations, and there was this one video that it kept trying to suggest to me for like a month and a half. So I finally broke down and watched it. It was like 10 overdone things in fantasy that will cause your editor to throw your book out or something like that. And I started watching it, and when like the first 3 out of 5 is something that Brandon Sanderson had done, I'm like, look, there aren't cliches. They're just poorly done cliches. I mean, cliches are there for a reason. They hit something in the cultural zeitgeist that interests us, but then everybody does it, and it's so full of copycats and knockoffs that are done poorly that people start to assume that it can only be done poorly. And I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, can we talk about like cliches and tropes for a second and how society views them?
Sure,
I'm gonna
but
like
question.
Oh, okay.
Up to you. Like, if you want this to be the thing.
I'll be super short. Like, tropes and cliches are, like, well, we think that if something has been done before, that it's bad, and it's not. It's not. Tropes are just tools that you can use for different stories, and something only becomes bad if you're doing it because you saw someone else do it and not because it's what you want for your story. There we go. That's my soapbox.
That was very concise and very wise. Thank you. One more question.
All right, so to finish us off here from Ryan Crockett, the question, is there a good checklist to start with on things in society that would be affected by your magic?
Oh, goodness.
I think it was Patricia C. Reed who had like a 32-page document checklist of things to think about with your magic system, but I have not seen that in 2 decades, so I am not sure where it is.
I know what you're talking about. I think that it wasn't necessarily about magic systems. I think it was about fantasy world building in general, but it still might be a good resource. I'll see if I could link it after the thing is up.
Where that is.
I'm sure Google will find it. Just give me a bit after we're over. So I see shoulders leaning forward as people begin to type. Okay, let's give ourselves each an outro. Tell us what you do, where we can find you in the following panels. Show your stuff. Go ahead, Quiana.
Oh, okay.
You pointed first.
I was pointing at. Okay. So I have a myriad of things that I'll be doing today. I'm in a Strong Women as Protagonist panel later today. I also have a forgiveness panel in Tolkien later, and I also have a presentation that I'll be doing about youth in leadership positions and how that and the societal effects of that. Yeah, you can contact me on Discord. I basically live on here, and I also work at the Lionsgate Space Center, so in Saratoga Springs. So, and we're actually open. So if you wear masks, you should go sign up, and then you will get to be in a mission that will probably be flown by me, or I'll be an actor there. So you should do that.
Awesome, fun. Go ahead, MK.
This is actually my last panel of the conference, so goodbye, everyone. You can find me, I have a website that's mkhutchins.com, or I'm on Twitter at mkhutchins, and I have a YA fantasy with food magic system called The Redwood Palace that's available. The sequel's coming out this summer. I think that's probably good.
Cool. Proving how different I am, my next panel will be at 6:00, and it's called "What Platform Should I Build My Game For? PC, Console, or Virtual Reality?" Quite different. My company just released a game called Final Winter. It's got a soft magic system that is mostly used to cause problems, sort of with an emergent story behind it that you kind of have to read between the lines in order to see it, because we certainly don't force it down your throat. And I will link that in the chat afterwards. Thank you so much for coming for this panel. I'm sorry that one of our panelists wasn't here, and I hope that you guys got what you were looking for, and we appreciate you coming to LTUE.